The gunshot split the air like thunder, and Rose Fletcher knew without looking back that her father's killer was still breathing, while the best man she had ever known lay bleeding in the dirt behind the general store. Wallace, Idaho had been quiet that morning in 1878, the kind of quiet that made people forget the world could turn savage in a heartbeat. But Rose had always known better, had always felt the violence simmering beneath the surface of frontier life like water about to boil. She ran without thinking, her skirts clutched in both fists, her breath tearing through her lungs as boots pounded the wooden boardwalk behind her. And she knew with absolute certainty that Samuel Crane would not stop until she was dead too, until every witness to his crime was silenced forever. The alley between the saloon and the feed store swallowed her whole, shadows thick as molasses in the early morning light, and she pressed herself against the rough wooden wall, splinters catching at her dress, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst right through her ribs. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. Samuel Crane's voice drifted through the narrow space between buildings, lazy and confident. "Come on out, Rose. Your daddy's dead, and you running just makes this harder on yourself. I'll make it quick if you cooperate." Rose bit down on her knuckles to keep from sobbing. Her father had been arguing with Crane over a land deed, a piece of property near the river that had been in her family since they had come west after the war. Crane had wanted it, had offered money, then threats, and finally he had simply taken what he wanted the way men like him always did. She heard his boots scrape against the dirt, moving closer to the alley entrance, and she knew she had seconds, maybe less. Then a hand closed over her mouth from behind, and terror exploded through her body like lightning. She tried to scream, tried to fight, but an arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her clean off her feet. A voice spoke low and urgent against her ear, a voice she did not know but would remember for the rest of her life. "Don't make a sound. I'm getting you out of here." The man carried her deeper into the alley, moving with a speed and silence that seemed impossible for someone his size. Rose could feel the solid muscle of his chest against her back, could smell leather and sage and horse sweat. He kicked open a door she had not even noticed in the shadows, pulled her through into what looked like a storage room packed with crates and barrels, then closed the door so carefully it barely whispered. He set her down but kept one hand over her mouth, his other hand raised in a gesture that begged for patience. Rose's eyes had adjusted enough to see him now, really see him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes that caught the thin light filtering through the cracks in the walls. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, nothing fancy, but his gun belt sat low on his hips with the ease of long familiarity. "I'm going to move my hand," he whispered. "But you have to stay quiet. Crane's right outside, and if he hears us, we're both dead. Do you understand?" Rose nodded, and he slowly lifted his palm from her lips. She sucked in a shaking breath, tasted dust and fear. "My father," she started, but he shook his head. "I know. I saw what happened. I'm sorry, but there's nothing we can do for him now. Right now we have to keep you alive." "Who are you?" "Name's Thomas Quinn. I just rode into town this morning looking for work. Wrong place, wrong time, I guess." He moved to the door, pressed his ear against it, listening. "Crane's got 3 men with him. They're spreading out, searching. We need to get you out of Wallace entirely." Rose felt the world tilting beneath her feet. Leave Wallace. Leave her father's body in the street. Leave her home, everything she had ever known. But even as the protests formed, she knew he was right. Samuel Crane owned half the town, had the sheriff in his pocket, and witnesses to murder did not fare well when the murderer held all the cards. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. Thomas turned to look at her, really look at her, and something shifted in his expression. "You do now. I'll get you somewhere safe, I promise you that, but we have to move fast. Why would you help me? You don't even know me." He was quiet for a moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he was not sure he should say. "My sister was killed by men like Crane. Men who thought they could do whatever they wanted because they had money and guns and no conscience. I didn't get there in time to save her. Maybe I can save you." The raw pain in his voice cut through Rose's shock, anchored her somehow. She nodded, straightened her spine despite the fear still coursing through her veins. "What do we do?" Thomas moved to the back of the storage room, started shifting crates. Behind them was another door, this one leading to what looked like a narrow service alley that ran behind the buildings on this side of the street. "My horse is tied up at the livery. If we can get there without being seen, we can ride out before Crane realizes you're gone. They'll follow us, probably. But I know these mountains better than most, and I'm betting Crane's men are hired guns, not trackers. We'll have an advantage once we're out of town." He pulled the door open slowly, checked both directions. "Stay close to me. Move when I move, stop when I stop. Don't make a sound unless absolutely necessary." Rose gathered her skirts again, wishing desperately that she was wearing her riding clothes instead of this cumbersome dress. But there was no time to change, no time for anything but survival. Thomas slipped through the door and she followed, her feet finding the packed dirt of the alley with barely a whisper. They moved like ghosts through the back ways of Wallace, keeping to the shadows, freezing whenever they heard voices or footsteps. Rose's pulse thundered in her ears so loud she was sure someone would hear it, but Thomas seemed perfectly calm, his movements controlled and deliberate. He had done this before, she realized. Had learned how to disappear, how to move through danger like smoke through fingers. The livery stable sat at the edge of town, a ramshackle building that smelled of hay and manure and horse. Thomas led her around to the side entrance, the one the stable hands used when they arrived before dawn. Inside, a massive bay gelding stood in one of the stalls, already saddled, as if Thomas had somehow known he would need to leave in a hurry. "Can you ride?" he asked, already leading the horse out. "Yes, my father taught me when I was a girl." The words caught in her throat. Her father, dead in the street. She pushed the grief down, locked it away in some deep place where it could not paralyze her. There would be time for mourning later if she survived. Thomas swung up into the saddle, then reached down for her. Rose grasped his hand, felt his fingers close strong and sure around hers, and he pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep her seat, had to press close against his back. Under any other circumstances, it would have been scandalous, but propriety seemed laughable in the face of murder and flight. "Hold on tight," he said, and then they were moving, the horses' hooves striking sparks from the stones as Thomas urged him into a gallop. They burst out of the livery and onto the main road leading out of Wallace just as someone shouted behind them. Rose risked a glance back and saw Crane himself standing in the middle of the street, his face twisted with rage, his arm raised as he pointed at them. Then Thomas leaned low over the horse's neck, and Rose flattened herself against his back, and the world became a blur of speed and dust and pounding hoofbeats. The road climbed into the hills, winding through stands of pine and Douglas fir. Thomas pushed the gelding hard for the first mile, then eased him back into a steady canter that ate up ground without exhausting the animal. Rose could hear shouts behind them, could hear the thunder of pursuit, but Thomas did not seem worried. He guided the horse off the main road onto a smaller trail, barely more than a deer path, that cut sharply to the left and plunged into thick forest. The canopy closed over them, green and cool and shadowed. Thomas slowed the horse to a walk, letting him pick his way carefully over roots and rocks. The sounds of pursuit faded, grew distant, then disappeared entirely. Rose allowed herself to breathe, to unclench her fingers from where they had been gripping Thomas's shirt so hard her knuckles had gone white. "Are we safe?" she asked. "For now. They'll try to track us, but like I said, I know these mountains. We'll stay off the main trails, move through places horses can barely go. By the time they figure out where we went, we'll be long gone." "Where are we going?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "There's a ranch about 3 days' ride from here, over the border into Montana. Owner's a friend of mine, owes me a favor. He'll give you work, a place to stay. You'll be safe there until we can figure out what to do about Crane." Rose wanted to protest that she could not simply hide forever, that justice needed to be done for her father's murder, but she was not naive enough to believe justice would come easily. Crane had power, and power in the territories meant you could get away with almost anything. She would need time, would need to plan, would need help if she was ever going to make him pay for what he had done. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I know you didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did." Thomas's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "A man who stands by and watches evil happen is just as guilty as the man who does it. I won't be that person. Not ever again." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of leather, the soft thud of hooves on forest loam, the whisper of wind through the high branches. Rose found herself noticing things about Thomas, despite everything: the breadth of his shoulders, the way he sat his horse like he had been born in the saddle, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to the animal. He was younger than she had first thought, probably not more than 25 or 26, and there was a weariness in him that spoke of hard living and harder lessons. "You said your sister was killed," Rose ventured after a while. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't help, but I'm sorry." Thomas's back stiffened slightly under her hands. Her name was Margaret. She was 17. Got involved with a ranch owner's son over in Wyoming, thought he was going to marry her. Instead, he got tired of her, and when she threatened to tell his father what they had been doing, he killed her. Made it look like she had fallen from her horse. Everyone believed him because he was rich and she was nobody. That's horrible. That's the world we live in, the one where money and power matter more than the truth. He paused, then added, "I spent 2 years tracking him down, learning the truth, finding proof. By the time I had enough to take to the law, he had already moved to California. The sheriff told me to let it go, that there was nothing to be done. So I rode to California, found him, and I beat the truth out of him in front of witnesses. He confessed. They arrested him, and he hanged for it 6 months later." Rose absorbed this, understanding now the hardness she had glimpsed in Thomas's eyes. That must have been some beating. "It was enough. I'm not proud of the violence, but I'm not sorry either. Margaret deserved justice, and I made sure she got it." He turned his head slightly, just enough that she could see his profile. "I'll help you get justice too, Rose. I give you my word on that." Something about the way he said it, the absolute conviction in his voice, made Rose believe him. She had known this man for less than an hour, had fled with him into the wilderness on nothing but instinct and desperation, but somehow she trusted him. Maybe it was the fact that he had saved her life when he could have just ridden away. Maybe it was the grief they shared, the understanding of what it meant to lose someone to senseless violence. Or maybe it was something else, something she did not yet have a name for. "I believe you," she said, and felt the truth of the words settle into her bones. They rode until the sun was high overhead, stopping only briefly to water the horse at a stream that cut through a narrow ravine. Thomas produced hard biscuits and dried meat from his saddlebags, and they ate standing in the shade of an enormous pine tree. Rose's body ached from the unaccustomed position on the horse, and her mind kept trying to drag her back to the image of her father falling, blood blooming across his chest. She forced herself to stay present, to focus on survival. "Tell me about your father," Thomas said as they prepared to mount up again. "What kind of man was he?" The question caught Rose off guard. Most people would have avoided the subject, would have thought it too painful. But there was something in Thomas's eyes that told her he understood, that talking about the dead kept them alive in a way silence never could. "He was kind," she said slowly. "Strong, but not in a way that needed proving. He came west after the war, after my mother died of fever. He wanted a fresh start, wanted to build something good. He bought that land near the river with everything he had, and he worked it himself. Taught me to read, to ride, to shoot. He used to say that a woman in the territories needed to be able to take care of herself, because nobody else was going to do it for her. Sounds like a wise man, he was, and he was stubborn. When Crane started pressuring him to sell, he refused. Said the land was going to be my inheritance, that he would not let some greedy snake take it just because he wanted it. I begged him to reconsider, told him it was not worth dying over." Her voice broke. "I was right, but he would not listen." Thomas reached out, put a hand on her shoulder. The touch was brief, respectful, but it steadied her. "He died standing up for what he believed in. That counts for something. It counts for nothing if Crane gets away with it. He won't, I promise you that." Thomas squeezed her shoulder gently, then released her. "Come on. We need to keep moving." They climbed back on the horse and continued deeper into the mountains. The terrain grew rougher, the path less certain. Thomas seemed to navigate by instinct, choosing routes that Rose would never have noticed, guiding the gelding through impossibly narrow passes and across streams running high with snowmelt. The sun tracked across the sky, painting the world in shades of gold and amber, and still they rode. By the time the light began to fail, Rose was so exhausted she could barely keep her eyes open. She had dozed several times against Thomas's back, waking with a start each time to find they were still moving, still climbing. When he finally pulled the horse to a stop in a small clearing ringed by aspens, she nearly wept with relief. "We'll camp here for the night," Thomas said, dismounting and then helping her down. Rose's legs almost gave out when her feet hit the ground, and he caught her, steadied her. "Easy. You're not used to riding like that. Sit down before you fall down." Rose sank onto a fallen log, watching as Thomas efficiently unsaddled the horse, rubbed him down, and hobbled him where he could graze. Then he began gathering wood for a fire, moving with the practiced ease of someone who had spent most of his life outdoors. Rose wanted to help, but her body refused to cooperate. Every muscle screamed in protest. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should be helping. You just watched your father murdered and fled for your life. I think you're entitled to sit for a minute." Thomas knelt, began building the fire. Within minutes he had flames crackling, pushing back the darkness that was gathering under the trees. "Are you hungry?" "I don't know. I can't tell anymore." He smiled slightly, a brief softening of his features. "That's shock. You need to eat anyway, keep your strength up." He pulled out more supplies from his saddlebags, began preparing what looked like a simple stew in a small pot. "It's not fancy, but it will fill your belly." While he cooked, Rose studied him in the firelight. There was something almost hypnotic about the way he moved, confident and capable. His hands were scarred, she noticed, marked with the kind of damage that came from years of hard work and harder fights. But they were gentle too, careful with the food, careful with the horse, careful with her. "Why were you in Wallace?" she asked. "You said you were looking for work." "I was. I worked a ranch down in Colorado through the winter, but the owner sold out to a big cattle company in the spring. They brought in their own men, so I moved on. Heard there might be opportunities in Idaho, so I headed north." He stirred the stew, tasted it, added something from a small pouch. Guess I found more than I bargained for. You could still leave. Ride on to wherever you were planning to go. I would understand. Thomas looked up at her, and the firelight caught in his eyes turned them to amber. I'm not leaving you, Rose. You're stuck with me until this is finished. Why? You don't owe me anything. Maybe not, but I owe it to myself. I told you about Margaret, about how I was not there when she needed me. I won't make that mistake twice. He ladled stew into a tin bowl, handed it to her. Eat. We've got a long day tomorrow. The stew was surprisingly good, rich with meat and wild onions and something else she could not identify. Rose ate mechanically at first, then with increasing appetite as her body remembered it needed fuel. Thomas ate his own portion in silence, staring into the flames, his expression distant. What will you do? Rose asked finally. After you get me to this ranch, I mean. Will you stay? I don't know. Depends on whether they need hands, whether you're settled. He set his empty bowl aside. I've been drifting for a long time, ever since Margaret died, never really staying anywhere more than a season or two. Gets lonely sometimes, but it's easier than putting down roots. Why is it easier? Thomas was quiet for so long Rose thought he was not going to answer. Then he said, because if you don't care about anything, nothing can hurt you. I learned that the hard way. Rose understood that particular kind of pain, the urge to build walls so high nothing could ever reach you again. She had felt it herself in the hours since her father's death, the temptation to simply shut down, to stop feeling anything at all. But something in her resisted it, insisted that feeling the pain meant she was still alive, still human. I don't want to stop caring, she said quietly. Even if it hurts. My father taught me that love is worth the risk, that a life without connection is not really living at all. Thomas looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The knowledge that they were both wounded, both lost, but somehow still standing. Your father sounds like he was a hell of a lot smarter than me, Thomas said. But there was no bitterness in it, only a kind of wondering sadness. They sat in comfortable silence after that, listening to the fire pop and hiss, to the night sounds of the forest around them. Thomas laid out bedrolls, gave Rose the thicker one despite her protests. He banked the fire, checked on the horse one more time, then settled down on the opposite side of the flames. Get some sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. You need rest too. I'll sleep later. Right now, making sure you're safe is more important. Rose wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her with insistent hands. She lay down, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and stared at the stars visible through the canopy of leaves. Somewhere out there, Samuel Crane was searching for her, planning what he would do when he found her. But for this moment in this clearing, she was safe. And Thomas Quinn, a stranger who had become her protector in the span of a single violent morning, was keeping watch. She fell asleep with that thought, and if her dreams were full of gunshots and blood, at least she was not alone in them. Rose woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of birds singing in the trees. For one blissful moment she forgot where she was, forgot everything that had happened. Then memory crashed back in, and she sat up with a gasp that made Thomas turn from where he was crouched by the fire. Easy, he said. You're safe. It's just morning. Rose pressed her hands to her face, forced herself to breathe. The sun was barely up, the light soft and golden. Thomas looked like he had not slept at all, his eyes shadowed with fatigue, but he moved with the same steady competence as the night before. Did you stay awake all night? She asked. Mostly. Dozed a little, I'm used to it. He poured coffee into a tin cup, brought it to her. Drink this. We need to get moving soon. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, and Rose drank it gratefully. Her body ached in places she had not known could ache, and the reality of her situation settled over her like a heavy cloak. Her father was dead. She was a fugitive. Everything she had ever known was gone, and she was riding into the wilderness with a man she had met yesterday. "I keep thinking I should be crying," she said, "or screaming, or falling apart, but I just feel numb." Thomas knelt beside her, his expression gentle. "That's normal. The grief will come when your body decides you are safe enough to feel it. Until then, the numbness is a gift. It keeps you moving. You sound like you speak from experience." "I do. When I found out about Margaret, I did not cry for 3 weeks. Then one night I was camping by myself and it hit me all at once, and I cried until I thought I would die from it. But I got through it, and you will too." Rose nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She finished the coffee, helped Thomas break camp and load the horse. Her muscles protested every movement, but she gritted her teeth and worked through the pain. By the time they were ready to ride, the sun had cleared the eastern peaks, spilling light across the mountains like liquid gold. They rode hard that day, pushing through terrain that grew increasingly wild and remote. Thomas took them along ridgelines that offered views for miles, checking constantly for signs of pursuit. Rose saw nothing but endless forest and stone, empty and pristine. By midday her body had adjusted somewhat to the rhythm of riding, and she found herself noticing things beyond her own discomfort. The way Thomas's hair curled slightly at his collar, the breadth of his shoulders, the way he spoke softly to the horse, reassuring and constant. She found herself wondering about him, about the life he had lived before yesterday. He was educated, she could tell from the way he spoke, but he was also clearly comfortable with violence and hardship. He had mentioned working ranches, but there was something else in him, something that suggested depth she had not yet glimpsed. "Can I ask you something?" she said during a brief rest stop. "Of course. Where are you from originally? You don't talk like most of the cowboys I have known." Thomas smiled slightly. "That's because I grew up in Boston. My father was a lawyer, wanted me to follow in his footsteps. I went to school, studied law for 2 years. Then the war came and everything changed. You fought." "I did. Joined up in '62, fought until it ended. By the time I came home, my parents were both dead from cholera, and I realized I did not want to be a lawyer anymore. Did not want to be anywhere near cities or civilization. So I came west, learned to work cattle, learned to survive. That was 10 years ago now." Rose did the math quickly. That would make him around 27, she guessed, only a few years older than her own 22. "Do you ever regret it, leaving that life behind?" "Not for a second. Out here things are simple. Hard but simple. You work, you survive, you try to do right by the people around you. That makes sense to me in a way all those books and laws never did." He glanced back at her. "What about you? Have you lived in Wallace your whole life?" "Most of it. We moved there when I was 8 after my mother died. Before that we lived in Ohio, but I barely remember it. Wallace has been home for as long as anything has been home." "Do you have other family? Anyone who might take you in?" Rose shook her head. "My father was an only child, and my mother's family disowned her when she married him. They thought he was beneath her, I guess. It was always just the 2 of us. Then we'll make sure you're set up properly at the ranch. Jack Thornton, the owner, is a good man. He'll treat you fairly, pay you decent wages. You'll be able to start over." The words should have been comforting, but Rose felt a strange pang at the thought of Thomas leaving her at this ranch and riding away. He had become her anchor in the storm, the one solid thing in a world that had been turned upside down. The thought of losing that stability frightened her, more than she wanted to admit. They camped that night beside a stream so clear Rose could see every pebble on the bottom. Thomas caught fish with a line and hook he produced from his seemingly bottomless saddlebags, and they ate them roasted over the fire, crispy and delicious. Rose felt herself relaxing despite everything, lulled by the sound of running water and the warmth of the flames. "Thank you," she said as they finished eating, "for everything. I know I have said it before, but I mean it. You saved my life." Thomas was cleaning the fish pan with sand from the stream bank. "You don't need to keep thanking me, Rose. I'm glad I was there. But you could have been killed. Crane and his men would not have hesitated to shoot you, I know, but some things are worth the risk." He set the pan aside, looked at her across the fire. "Can I tell you something? And you have to promise not to laugh. I promise. When I saw you running, when I saw the terror on your face, something in me just knew I had to help you. It was not even a decision, really. It was more like instinct, like I was supposed to be there at that exact moment." He rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I know that sounds foolish." "It does not sound foolish at all," Rose said softly. "I felt something too when you pulled me into that alley, like I could trust you completely, even though I did not know you, like you were supposed to save me." Their eyes met across the fire, and the air between them seemed to thicken with something Rose could not quite name. It was not just gratitude, though she felt that. It was not just the forced intimacy of their situation, though that was part of it. It was something deeper, something that hummed in her bones like a tuning fork struck just right. Thomas cleared his throat, looked away first. "We should get some sleep. Tomorrow is the last full day of riding, and then we will be at the ranch." Rose nodded, but as she lay down in her bedroll that night, she found herself thinking not about the ranch or her father or Samuel Crane. She found herself thinking about Thomas, about the way he looked in firelight, about the gentleness in his scarred hands. And she wondered if maybe, in the midst of all this darkness and loss, something unexpected was beginning to grow. The third day of riding brought them down out of the high country and into rolling grasslands that stretched toward distant mountains. The landscape opened up, vast and beautiful, dotted with wildflowers that turned the meadows into carpets of color. Thomas seemed to relax as they rode, his shoulders loosening, and Rose realized he had been tense the whole time they were in the mountains, watching for pursuit. "Are we safe now?" she asked. "Safer anyway. If Crane's men were going to catch us, they would have done it in the mountains. Out here we can see for miles, and the ranch is not far. Another few hours." Rose should have been relieved, but instead she felt a strange reluctance. Once they reached the ranch, her time with Thomas would end. He would leave, continue his drifting life, and she would be left alone again. The thought sat heavy in her chest. "Will you stay?" she asked before she could stop herself. "At the ranch, I mean, even just for a little while." Thomas did not answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "I was planning to move on once I knew you were settled, but if you want me to stay for a few days, I can do that. I would like that, if it is not too much trouble." "It's no trouble, Rose, no trouble at all." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, full of unspoken understanding. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks when they crested a rise, and Rose saw the ranch spread out below them. It was larger than she had expected, with a substantial main house, several barns, and what looked like a bunkhouse and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the pastures, and she could see people moving around the yard. "That's the Thornton place," Thomas said. "Jack runs about 200 head, mostly sells to the army forts. It's good, honest work." They rode down the long approach road, and by the time they reached the yard, a man had emerged from the house to greet them. He was older than Thomas, maybe 40, with sun-weathered skin and shrewd eyes that took in the situation with a single glance. "Thomas Quinn," he he said, his voice carrying easily across the space between them. Been a while. What brings you to my doorstep? Thomas dismounted, helped Rose down. Her legs were steadier now, accustomed to the long hours on horseback. Need a favor, Jack. This is Rose Fletcher. She's had some trouble down in Idaho, needs a place to stay and work until things settle down. Jack Thornton studied Rose with the same assessing gaze he had turned on Thomas. What kind of trouble? The kind where a man with money and no conscience killed her father and then tried to kill her for being a witness. I got her out, but she can't go back. Not yet. Jack's expression darkened. I see. And you vouch for her, with my life. Something passed between the two men, some understanding born of long acquaintance and shared history. Jack nodded slowly. All right then. We can always use another hand, especially one who knows their way around work. Can you cook, Miss Fletcher? I can, Rose said, finding her voice. And I can sew, keep house, tend animals. My father taught me to work. Good. My wife passed 2 years back, and this place has been falling apart without a woman's touch. If you're willing to help with the house and the cooking for the hands, I'll pay you fair wages and give you a room. No questions asked about your past. Relief flooded through Rose so powerfully her knees almost buckled. Thank you, Mr. Thornton. I will work hard, I promise. I'm sure you will. Thomas doesn't vouch for people lightly. Jack turned back to Thomas. You staying? For a few days, if you have the room. Always have room for you, you know that. Put your horse up and get settled. Supper's in an hour. Jack disappeared back into the house, and Thomas led Rose toward the barn. The other ranch hands eyed them curiously but kept working, for which Rose was grateful. She was not ready for questions, not ready to explain herself. Thomas showed her the bunkhouse, a long building with rows of narrow beds. At the far end was a smaller room, separated by a curtain. You'll have privacy here, he said. It's not much, but it's yours. The room contained a bed, a small table, and a trunk for belongings. It was Spartan but clean, and to Rose it looked like paradise. It's perfect, she said. Thank you. Thomas hesitated in the doorway, as if there was something he wanted to say but could not quite find the words. Finally, he just nodded. I'll be in the main bunkhouse if you need anything. Get some rest before supper. Rose spent the next hour washing the trail dust from her face and hands, trying to make herself presentable. She had only the clothes she was wearing, but she brushed out her dark hair and pinned it up as neatly as she could manage. When she emerged from the bunkhouse, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that took her breath away. Supper was in the main house, a rowdy affair with a dozen ranch hands crowded around a long table. Jack introduced her simply as Rose, a new member of the household, and if the men were curious about her sudden appearance, they were too polite to ask. The food was plain but plentiful, and Rose found herself eating with real appetite for the first time since her father's death. Thomas sat across from her, and she found her eyes drawn to him again and again. He was different here, more relaxed, joking easily with the other men. She saw the way they respected him, the way they listened when he spoke. He had lived this life for a long time, she realized. He belonged here in a way she was not sure she ever would. After supper, Jack asked to speak with her privately. They went out onto the porch, where the night air was cool and sweet with the scent of sage. Thomas told me what happened in Wallace, Jack said without preamble. I'm sorry about your father. No one should have to see that. Thank you. I want you to know you're safe here. I don't have much use for men like Samuel Crane, and I won't let anyone come onto my property looking to do you harm. You have my word on that. Rose felt tears prick at her eyes, the first real emotion she had allowed herself since fleeing Wallace. I appreciate that more than you know, Mr. Thornton. Jack, just Jack. He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the darkening landscape. Thomas is a good man. One of the best I have known. He'll do right by you. He already has. I mean, beyond getting you here safely. He cares about you, whether he's admitted it to himself or not. I can see it in the way he looks at you. Jack turned to face her fully. I'm not trying to put ideas in your head. Just want you to know that if something were to develop between you two, you would have my blessing. For what that's worth. Rose did not know what to say to that, so she just nodded. Jack clapped her gently on the shoulder and went back inside, leaving her alone with the night and her thoughts. She was still standing there when Thomas emerged from the bunkhouse, his hands in his pockets. He climbed the porch steps, leaned against the railing beside her. Settling in all right, I think so. Everyone has been very kind. That's Jack's doing. He sets the tone for the whole operation. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said, I was thinking I might stay a week instead of just a few days. Make sure you're really settled before I move on. Rose's heart lifted despite herself. I would like that. Good. Then it's settled. He turned to look at her, and in the dim light from the house windows, his face was all plains and shadows. Rose, I need to tell you something. What is it? I've been thinking about what you said about not wanting to stop caring even if it hurts, and I think maybe you're right. I think maybe I've been running for so long I forgot what it's like to stay. He took a breath, as if steeling himself. What I'm trying to say is that I want to help you get justice for your father. Really help, not just get you to safety and then disappear. I want to see this through with you, all the way to the end. Rose felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been locked tight since the moment she saw her father fall. You would do that, even though it might take months, even though it could be dangerous. I would. Because it's the right thing to do and because He trailed off, shook his head. Because you deserve better than to spend your life looking over your shoulder. You deserve to go home. Rose reached out without thinking, took his hand in hers. His fingers were warm and rough, calloused from hard work. Thomas, I don't know what home is anymore. My father is gone. Wallace will never be the same. But I think maybe home is not a place. Maybe it's people. Maybe it's this moment right here. Thomas looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. And then, so quietly she almost missed it, he whispered, I'm going to make you a promise, Rose Fletcher. I'm going to see you safe and happy and free, or I'm going to die trying. That's my vow to you. Do you believe me? Rose looked into his eyes, saw the absolute sincerity there, the fierce determination. And she knew with a certainty that went bone deep that he meant every word, that he would keep this promise even if it cost him everything. I believe you, she whispered back, and I'm never looking back. Something shifted between them in that moment, something fundamental and irreversible. Thomas squeezed her hand gently, then released it, but the connection remained. And Rose knew that whatever happened next, whatever trials they would face in bringing Samuel Crane to justice, she would not face them alone. The week Thomas had promised turned into 2, then 3. He threw himself into work on the ranch, helping with everything from mending fences to breaking horses, and Rose found herself falling into a routine that was both exhausting and oddly comforting. She woke before dawn to prepare breakfast for the hands, spent her days cleaning and organizing the neglected main house, and prepared hearty suppers that the men devoured with enthusiasm. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done in Wallace, but it gave her purpose, kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. And every evening, after the work was done and the other hands had retired to the bunkhouse, she and Thomas would sit on the porch and talk. They spoke of everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Rose learned that Thomas loved poetry, could recite entire passages of Whitman and Longfellow from memory. Thomas learned that Rose had always wanted to travel to see the ocean, to visit the places she had only read about in books. "Someday," she said one night, "when all this is over, I want to go to San Francisco. I want to stand on the beach and watch the waves come in." "Then you will," Thomas said with the quiet confidence that had become so familiar to her. "I'll take you myself if I have to." Rose smiled, allowed herself to imagine it. The two of them standing on a beach, the Pacific stretching out forever before them. It seemed impossibly distant, impossibly romantic. But then, a month ago she would have said it was impossible that she would be here, on a ranch in Montana, falling in love with a cowboy who had saved her life, falling in love. The realization hit her one morning as she was kneading bread dough, her hands working automatically while her mind wandered. She was falling in love with Thomas Quinn, had probably been falling since the moment he pulled her into that alley and promised to keep her safe. The knowledge should have frightened her, but instead it felt right, inevitable, like water finding its level. The question was whether Thomas felt the same way. He was careful with her, respectful, maintaining a physical distance even as their emotional intimacy grew. He never touched her unnecessarily, never presumed anything beyond friendship. Rose found herself wishing he would, found herself imagining what it would feel like to have his arms around her, to feel his lips against hers. Jack noticed, of course. He noticed everything. One afternoon, he found Rose in the kitchen, staring out the window at where Thomas was working with a particularly stubborn horse in the corral. "You planning to tell him how you feel?" Jack asked, making her jump. "I don't know what you're talking about," Rose said, but her face betrayed her with a fierce blush. "Sure you do. You're in love with him, clear as day. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Nothing. He's staying here out of obligation, out of a sense of duty. Once we figure out what to do about Crane, he'll move on. That's what he does." Jack made a skeptical noise. "Thomas stays places when he has a reason to stay. Used to be he never had a reason. Now I'm thinking he might." Before Rose could respond, there was a commotion from the yard. She and Jack hurried outside to find one of the hands, a young man named Billy, riding in at a gallop. He pulled his horse up hard, breathing heavily. "Riders coming," he gasped. "4 of them coming up from the south. They're asking questions in town, showing a picture of a woman. They're looking for someone." Rose's blood turned to ice. Thomas was already moving, striding across the yard with that dangerous grace she had seen the day they fled Wallace. "How far out are they?" "Maybe an hour. I rode hard to get ahead of them." Thomas turned to Jack. "Can you hide her?" "Already thinking about it. There's a root cellar under the kitchen, hidden panel. They won't find it unless they tear the house apart, and they won't get that far." Jack was moving toward the house, gesturing for Rose to follow. "Come on, girl. We don't have much time." But Rose stood frozen, her mind racing. "No, I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of running." Thomas was in front of her in 2 strides, his hands on her shoulders. "Rose, listen to me. This is not the time for pride. If those men are from Crane, they're here to kill you. We need to keep you safe." "And then what? I hide forever. I let my father's murder go unpunished because I'm too scared to face the man who did it." Rose shook her head, feeling something fierce and bright burning in her chest. "No, I'm done being a victim. I want to fight. This is not a fight you can win, not like this. Crane has resources, power. We need to be smart about this." "Then let's be smart. Let's use this. If those men find me here, if they report back to Crane that I'm on this ranch, maybe he'll come himself. Maybe we can lure him out, get him away from Wallace and all his protection." Thomas's eyes widened. "That's insane. That's exactly what he wants." "No, what he wants is for me to be a frightened girl who stays silent. What he wants is for no one to stand up to him. But I'm not going to give him that." Rose reached up, covered Thomas's hands with her own. You promised to help me get justice. This is how we do it. We make him come to us." Jack was watching this exchange with interest. "She's got a point, Thomas. If we're smart about it, if we plan this right, we could turn the tables on Crane. I've got a dozen good men here, all of them handy with a gun. We could make this ranch a trap instead of a hiding place." "You're both crazy," Thomas said, but Rose could see him considering it, could see the wheels turning in his mind. "Even if we could make it work, it's dangerous as hell. People could die. People are going to die anyway if Crane is not stopped. How many other families has he destroyed? How many more will he destroy if someone does not stand up to him?" Rose squeezed his hands. "You told me you wanted to see this through. This is seeing it through." Thomas was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he sighed, a sound of resignation and determination mixed together. "All right, but we do this my way with a real plan. No heroes, no unnecessary risks." "Agreed, agreed," Rose said, relief flooding through her. "Then let's get to work. We've got an hour before those men arrive, and we need to be ready." The next hour was a flurry of activity. Jack gathered his men, explained the situation in terse, efficient terms. To Rose's surprise, not one of them balked. They were loyal to Jack, and Jack had made it clear he was siding with Rose. Thomas took charge of positioning men around the property, setting up sight lines and fallback positions. He moved like a general planning a battle, and Rose realized he must have learned this during the war, this ability to think tactically, to see the whole field at once. Rose herself stayed in the house, watching from a window as the riders approached. There were 4 of them, just as Billy had said, and even from a distance she could tell they were hired guns. They sat their horses with the loose confidence of men who were comfortable with violence, and they wore their weapons openly, almost casually. Thomas was waiting for them in the yard, his stance relaxed, but his hand never far from his gun. Jack stood beside him, and Rose could see several of the other ranch hands positioned strategically around the buildings. The riders pulled up, and the lead man, a thin, weasel-faced individual with cold eyes, spoke. "We're looking for a woman. Name of Rose Fletcher. Word is she might have come this way." "Don't know anyone by that name," Thomas said easily. "What's your business with her? That's between us and her." "You seen any strangers come through here in the last few weeks?" "We see strangers all the time. This is a working ranch, not a monastery. People come looking for work, we hire them or we don't. That's the extent of my concern." The weasel-faced man's eyes narrowed. "You're being mighty unhelpful, friend. My employer does not take kindly to people who obstruct his business. And I don't take kindly to armed men riding onto my property making demands," Jack interjected. "You want to ask questions, you do it polite, or you turn around and ride back where you came from." The tension in the yard ratcheted up several notches. Rose could see hands moving toward guns, could feel the violence simmering just below the surface. Then Thomas spoke again, his voice carrying clearly. "Tell your employer that if he wants to talk to someone on this ranch, he can come himself. We don't deal with hired help." The weasel-faced man smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "You might regret saying that. I doubt it. Now get off this property before I have my men escort you off." For a moment Rose thought they were going to fight right then and there, but the weasel-faced man was smart enough to recognize the odds were not in his favor. He nodded slowly, turned his horse. "We'll be back. You can count on that." "Looking forward to it," Thomas said. The riders left at a canter, kicking up dust. Rose released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Thomas and Jack stood watching until the riders were out of sight, then Thomas turned and strode into the house. He found Rose in the kitchen and pulled her into a fierce, brief hug. "That was the easy part," he said. "Now comes the hard part, waiting." But the wait was not as long as they had expected. 3 days later, just after dawn, a rider approached the ranch carrying a white flag. Thomas met him in the yard, and Rose watched from the porch as the rider delivered his message. Mr. Samuel Crane requests a meeting with Miss Rose Fletcher. He wishes to discuss the unfortunate events in Wallace and reach a mutually agreeable resolution. He will come here to this ranch 3 days hence at noon. He will bring only 2 men with him. He asks that you extend the same courtesy. Thomas looked up at Rose, a question in his eyes. She nodded just once. Thomas turned back to the rider. Tell Crane we accept, 3 days noon. And tell him that if he tries anything, he won't leave this ranch alive. The rider nodded and left. Thomas climbed the porch steps, sat down heavily beside Rose. This is really happening. You understand what this means. If we do this, if we confront Crane directly, there's no going back. It ends here one way or another. I know, and I'm ready. Thomas reached over, took her hand. They sat like that for a long time, watching the sun climb into the sky, neither speaking. There were no words adequate for what they were about to face, no way to express the strange mix of fear and anticipation that gripped them both. So they just held hands and drew strength from each other's presence, and that was enough. The 3 days passed in a strange fugue of preparation and waiting. Thomas drilled Jack's men, made sure everyone knew their positions and responsibilities. He and Jack planned for every contingency they could imagine, setting up backup plans and emergency protocols. Rose helped where she could, but mostly she tried to stay calm, tried to prepare herself mentally for what was coming. On the evening before the meeting, Thomas found her sitting alone in the small room in the bunkhouse. He knocked softly on the doorframe and she looked up, managed a smile. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Of course." He sat on the narrow bed beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "How are you holding up?" "I'm scared," Rose admitted. "But I'm also angry, and I think the anger is stronger." "Good. Anger keeps you sharp. Just don't let it make you reckless." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said, "Rose, there's something I need to say, in case tomorrow goes badly, in case I don't get another chance." "Don't talk like that." "I have to. Because if I don't say this now, I might regret it forever." He turned to face her fully, took both her hands in his. "I love you, Rose Fletcher. I think I started loving you the moment I saw you running for your life, and I have been falling deeper every day since. I know this is probably the worst possible time to tell you, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I needed you to know. You've changed something in me, made me want to be better, want to stay instead of always running. So whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that loving you has been the best thing I have done with my life." Rose felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of joy, of love finally acknowledged. "Thomas, I love you too. I think I have been afraid to admit it, afraid that if I said it out loud something terrible would happen. But I'm not afraid anymore. I love you and I want a life with you, a real life with a future. And tomorrow we're going to make that possible." Thomas leaned forward and Rose met him halfway. Their lips touched, gentle at first, then deeper, pouring all their fear and hope and love into that single kiss. It felt like a promise, like a vow sealed with their bodies instead of words. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to marry you, Rose Fletcher," he whispered. "Soon as this is over, soon as you'll have me, I'm going to make you my wife. That's another promise." "I'll hold you to that," Rose whispered back and kissed him again. They sat together long into the night, holding each other, talking in low voices about the future they were going to build. They spoke of a ranch of their own someday, of children and horses and quiet mornings. They spoke of traveling to San Francisco, of standing together on that beach and watching the waves. They built a life in words and promises, and by the time Thomas finally left to get a few hours of sleep before dawn, Rose felt centered, grounded, ready. The morning of the meeting dawned clear and bright, not a cloud in the sky. Rose dressed carefully, choosing her most practical clothes, tying her hair back so it would not obscure her vision. She checked the small revolver Thomas had given her, made sure it was loaded and within easy reach. She was not planning to shoot anyone, but she would not be helpless either. Never again. Thomas was waiting for her in the yard, along with Jack and the man they had chosen as their second, a steady hand named Mike, who had fought in the war alongside Thomas years before. They all looked grim but determined, ready for whatever came next. "Remember the plan," Thomas said, looking at each of them in turn. "We meet them in the open, away from the buildings. Jack's men are positioned where they can see everything but stay out of sight unless needed. We talk, we hear what Crane has to say. If he's willing to turn himself in to confess to the territorial marshal, we let him leave and we escort him to the law. If not, we arrest him ourselves and take him in by force. No gunfight unless absolutely necessary. Understood?" Everyone nodded. Rose took her position beside Thomas, and they walked together to the center of the yard. The sun climbed higher, and the minutes ticked past with agonizing slowness. Then, precisely at noon, riders appeared on the southern approach. Samuel Crane rode at the center, flanked by two hard-looking men who were clearly guards. He was older than Rose had expected, maybe 50, with silver hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty that twisted his features. He wore expensive clothes, a fine suit that looked absurd in the rough ranch setting, and he carried himself with the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. The three riders stopped about 20 feet away. Crane smiled, and it was the smile of a snake. "Miss Fletcher, how good to finally meet you properly. You've led me on quite a chase." "You murdered my father," Rose said, her voice steady despite the fury burning in her chest. "You shot him in cold blood because he would not sell you his land. A tragic misunderstanding. Your father pulled a weapon on me." "I was merely defending myself." "That's a lie and you know it. My father was unarmed," Crane shrugged. "A matter of perspective. Sadly, the only other witness seems to have disappeared, so it becomes a question of my word against yours. And I think we both know whose word will carry more weight with the law." "Not if I testify," Thomas said. "I saw what happened. I saw you murder an unarmed man in the street." Crane's eyes narrowed as he looked at Thomas for the first time. "And who might you be?" "Thomas Quinn." "I'm the man who's going to see you hang for what you did." Bold words, but I'm afraid you'll find it difficult to testify if you're dead. Crane nodded slightly, and his two guards tensed. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me Miss Fletcher, and in exchange, I won't have my men kill everyone on this ranch. It's a generous offer, considering." "Here's a counter-proposal," Jack said, stepping forward. "You confess to murder, turn yourself in to the territorial marshal, and maybe you'll live long enough to stand trial. Because if you try anything here, my men will cut you down before you clear leather." As if on cue, half a dozen rifle barrels appeared at various points around the yard, all pointed at Crane and his guards. Crane's face went white, then red with rage. "You think this changes anything? I have an army of men. I can hire 50 more. You can't protect her forever." "We don't have to protect her forever," Thomas said. "Just long enough to get justice, and that starts now." He took a step toward Crane, his hand on his gun. Crane's guards moved, reaching for their weapons, and then everything happened at once. One of the guards drew his revolver, swung it toward Thomas. A rifle cracked from the barn, and the guard fell from his horse, blood blooming on his shoulder. The second guard tried to run, but Mike was faster, tackling him from his horse and pinning him to the ground. Crane himself fumbled for a weapon, but Thomas was already there, his gun pressed to Crane's chest. "Don't," Thomas said quietly. "I would love an excuse, but Rose deserves better than that. Get down from your horse." Crane dismounted slowly, his hands raised. His face was a mask of impotent fury. "You have no idea what you've done. I'll destroy all of you. Every single person on this ranch will pay for this." "I don't think so," said a new voice. Everyone turned to see a man riding into the yard wearing a marshal's badge. He was in his 50s, weathered and competent looking, and he surveyed the scene with interest. "I'm Marshal Henry Clark. Got an interesting telegram a few days ago from a Mr. Jack Thornton, informing me of a potential murder suspect who might be in the area. Looks like I arrived just in time." Rose looked at Jack in shock. He shrugged. "Insurance. I sent word as soon as those hired guns came looking for you. Figured we might need the law on our side when this went down." Marshal Clark dismounted, walked over to where Thomas still had his gun on Crane. "Mr. Crane, I presume. I'll need you to come with me. You're being arrested on suspicion of murder." "This is absurd. I'm a respected businessman. You can't just arrest me on the word of some girl and a drifter." "Actually, I can. And I have testimony from 3 witnesses now, plus suspicious behavior that includes sending armed men to harass people and threatening a ranch full of civilians. You'll get your day in court, Mr. Crane, but it will be in front of a judge, not out here." Clark produced handcuffs, secured Crane's wrists behind his back. "Anyone have anything to add before I take him in?" Rose stepped forward, looked Crane directly in the eyes. "My father's name was James Fletcher. He was a good man who worked hard and treated people with respect. You killed him because you wanted his land, because you thought you could take whatever you wanted without consequences. But you were wrong. There are always consequences, and now you're going to face them." Crane tried to stare her down, but Rose did not look away. Finally, it was Crane who broke eye contact, his gaze dropping to the dirt. Marshal Clark nodded approvingly. "Well said, Miss Fletcher. I'll need you and Mr. Quinn to come with me to Wallace, give formal statements. After that, this will be in the hands of the court." The next few hours were a blur. Clark arrested Crane's 2 guards as well, bound them all and prepared to transport them to Wallace. Rose and Thomas saddled horses, prepared for the journey. Jack pulled Rose aside before they left. "You did good, girl. Your father would be proud." "Thank you for everything, Jack, for taking me in, for believing in me. I'll never forget it. You'll always have a place here if you need it, both of you." Jack glanced at Thomas, who was checking his horse's saddle. "Take care of him. He's a good man, but he's been hurt. He needs someone to remind him life is worth living." "I will," Rose promised. The ride to Wallace took 2 days. Marshal Clark was professional and efficient, keeping Crane and his men secured and separate from Rose and Thomas. They camped under the stars the first night, and Rose lay in her bedroll looking up at the infinite sky, marveling at how much had changed in such a short time. A month ago she had been living a quiet life in Wallace, assuming her future was settled and predictable. Now her father was dead, she was in love with a cowboy, and she was about to testify in a murder trial that would determine whether justice still meant anything in the territories. Thomas lay beside her, close enough that she could hear him breathing. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. "That life is strange, that nothing ever turns out the way you expect it to." "Is that a bad thing?" Rose considered. "No, I think maybe it's exactly how things are supposed to be. If my life had gone according to plan, I never would have met you. I've been thinking about that. About how I just happened to be in Wallace that morning, how I saw what happened. What if I had been an hour later? What if I had ridden to a different town? But you did not. You were exactly where you needed to be. Fate, you think, maybe, or maybe just luck, does it matter? Thomas rolled onto his side, propped himself up on one elbow so he could look down at her. I guess not. All that matters is what we do now, and I meant what I said, Rose. When this is over, I want to marry you. I want to build a life together. What kind of life? Whatever kind we want. We could stay at Jack's ranch or find one of our own. Could travel if you want, see those places you've been dreaming about. I've got some money saved, and once Crane's land gets sorted out, your father's property will come to you. We'll have options. Rose reached up, traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. I want all of it. The ranch, the travel, the family. I want a life so full and rich that it makes up for everything we've lost. Can we have that? We can have anything we're willing to work for, and I'm willing to work very hard. Thomas leaned down, kissed her gently. I love you, Rose Fletcher, more than I thought I could love anyone. I love you too, Thomas Quinn, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it. They arrived in Wallace late the following afternoon. The town looked just as Rose remembered it, but everything felt different now. She was different. She was not the frightened girl who had fled for her life. She was a woman who had faced her fears, who had fought back, who had found love in the darkest of times. Marshal Clark took them straight to his office, where they gave detailed statements about what had happened the morning of James Fletcher's murder. Rose spoke clearly, holding nothing back, describing every moment from the argument she had overheard to the gunshot that had ended her father's life. Thomas corroborated her story, adding his own observations as a witness. By the time they were finished, it was evening. Clark assured them that Crane would be held until the circuit judge arrived, which would be in about 3 weeks. You did good today, he told them. Both of you. It takes courage to stand up to men like Crane. What happens if the judge does not believe us? Rose asked. Then we keep fighting. But I don't think it will come to that. The evidence is strong and Crane's reputation has been slipping for a while now. Turns out a lot of people in the territories have grievances against him, but nobody was willing to be the first to speak up. You might have opened the floodgates. That was encouraging, but Rose would not feel truly safe until Crane was convicted and sentenced. She and Thomas checked into the town's small hotel, taking separate rooms because it was the proper thing to do, even though Rose would have preferred to stay close to him. They had dinner at the hotel's restaurant, and Rose found herself looking around at the familiar faces in the room. Some people recognized her, whispered to each other when they thought she was not looking. But Thomas sat across from her, solid and steady, and his presence made her feel invincible. What do you want to do while we wait for the trial? He asked. I want to visit my father's grave. And I want to see the property, the land he died defending. I need to see it one more time before I decide what to do with it. All right, we'll do that tomorrow. They finished their meal and walked back through the quiet streets. The night was cool, the stars brilliant overhead. When they reached Rose's room, Thomas hesitated. I don't want to leave you, he admitted. I know it's not proper, but I don't care about proper anymore. Rose smiled, unlocked her door. Then don't leave, stay with me, just to sleep, just to be close. I need that tonight. Thomas followed her inside and they lay down together on the narrow bed, fully clothed, wrapped in each other's arms. They did not kiss, did not do anything beyond hold each other, but it was the most intimate moment of Rose's life. This was trust, absolute and complete. This was love in its purest form. She fell asleep listening to his heartbeat, and for the first time since her father's death, she did not dream of violence or loss. She dreamed of the future, bright and full of possibility. The next morning they rode out to the Fletcher property. It was just as Rose remembered, a beautiful piece of land that stretched from the river up into the foothills. The house her father had built sat empty, looking sad and neglected. Rose dismounted, walked slowly through the rooms where she had grown up. Everything was as her father had left it. His coat still hung on the peg by the door. His book, a volume of Emerson's essays, lay open on the table where he had been reading it. Rose touched the pages gently, felt tears well up. This was the first time she had really allowed herself to grieve, and the pain was overwhelming. Thomas found her sitting on the floor of her father's bedroom, crying into her hands. He did not say anything, just sat down beside her and pulled her into his arms. Rose cried until she had no tears left, cried until her body ached and her throat was raw. And through it all, Thomas held her, his arms a shelter against the storm of grief. When she finally calmed, he helped her to her feet. "Your father loved you very much," he said. "I can see it in everything here. This whole place was built with love. I know, and I'm going to honor that. I'm going to keep this land, going to make something of it. Maybe not right away, but someday. It's my legacy." They spent the rest of the day cleaning the house, making it habitable again. It felt good to work, to restore order to the chaos. By evening, the place looked like a home again, and Rose felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was still her father's house, would always be his in some way, but it could be hers too. Hers and Thomas's. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Rose and Thomas sat on the porch and looked out over the land. "We could live here," Rose said. "After we're married, we could fix the place up, work the land the way my father intended. What do you think?" "I think it sounds perfect," Thomas said. "But only if that's what you really want. I don't want you to feel obligated to stay because of your father's memory. It's not obligation, it's choice. I choose this land, this place, and I choose you." Rose took his hand, laced her fingers through his. "Let's build our life here, Thomas. Let's make something beautiful. Then that's what we'll do. As soon as the trial is over, as soon as Crane is dealt with, we'll come back here and start fresh, together." They stayed at the house that night, sleeping in Rose's old room, and in the morning they rode back to town. The next 3 weeks passed slowly, measured out in days of waiting and preparation. Rose met with Marshal Clark regularly, going over her testimony, making sure every detail was clear. Thomas never left her side, a constant presence that gave her strength. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. The courthouse was packed with spectators, more people than Rose had ever seen in one place in Wallace. Samuel Crane sat at the defendant's table, his expensive lawyers flanking him. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his power and his threats. The trial lasted 2 days. Rose testified first, describing what she had seen in clear, unflinching detail. Crane's lawyers tried to discredit her, suggesting she was motivated by greed or anger or simply mistaken. But Rose did not waver. She told the truth, the whole truth, exactly as it had happened. Thomas testified next, and his account matched Rose's perfectly. The defense tried to suggest he was biased, that he was romantically involved with Rose and therefore unreliable. Thomas simply said, "I love her, yes, but I would never lie under oath, not for anyone. What I saw that day was murder, plain and simple." Several other Wallace residents came forward, people who had witnessed Crane's intimidation tactics, who had seen him threaten James Fletcher in the days before his death. The picture that emerged was damning. Crane was a man who took what he wanted by force, who believed himself above the law. In the end, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict in a steady voice. "We find the defendant, Samuel Crane, guilty of murder in the 1st degree." The courtroom erupted in noise, some people cheering, others gasping. Rose felt her knees go weak, and Thomas caught her, held her steady. "It's over," he whispered. "You did it. You got justice." The judge sentenced Crane to death by hanging, to be carried out in 60 days. As the bailiff led Crane away in chains, the man turned and looked at Rose one last time. There was no arrogance left in him now, only the hollow realization that he had finally met consequences he could not buy or bully his way out of. Rose met his gaze steadily, and in that moment she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Her father's death had been avenged. Justice, that elusive thing, had been served. Outside the courthouse, people crowded around to congratulate Rose, to tell her she was brave, that her father would be proud. Rose accepted their kind words with grace, but all she really wanted was to be alone with Thomas. Finally, as the sun began to set, they managed to slip away, walking hand in hand to the quiet spot by the river where James Fletcher was buried. Rose knelt beside the simple grave marker, placed her hand on the sun-warmed stone. "I did it, Papa," she whispered. "I made him pay for what he did to you, and I'm going to be happy. I'm going to live the life you wanted for me, full and rich and good. I promise you that." Thomas knelt beside her, placed his hand over hers. Together they stayed there as the light faded, honoring the memory of a good man who had died too soon. When full dark had fallen, they walked back to town, but this time the darkness did not feel threatening. It felt peaceful, like a blanket settling gently over the world. The next day, Thomas took Rose to see the pastor at the small church on the edge of town. "We want to get married," he said simply, "as soon as possible." The pastor, an elderly man named Reverend Matthews, smiled. "I heard about the trial, about what you've been through. I would be honored to marry you. How does tomorrow afternoon sound?" "Perfect," Rose said. They invited Marshal Clark and a few of the people who had supported Rose during the trial. Jack Thornton rode down from Montana, refusing to miss the wedding. It was a simple ceremony, held in the church with afternoon light streaming through the windows, but it was perfect. Rose wore a new dress, pale blue cotton with white lace, that she had bought with money from the sale of some of her father's tools. Thomas wore his Sunday best, his hair neatly combed, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. When Reverend Matthews asked if anyone objected to the union, the church was silent. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed Rose with such tenderness that several people in the congregation wiped away tears. And when they walked out of the church together, Rose felt like she was floating, like the world had suddenly become brighter and more beautiful than she had ever imagined possible. They had a small reception at the hotel, with cake and dancing and laughter. Jack gave a toast that made everyone cry and laugh in equal measure. Marshal Clark wished them well and extracted a promise that they would visit whenever they came to town. And through it all, Thomas never let go of Rose's hand, as if afraid she might disappear if he released her. That night in a room at the hotel, they came together as husband and wife. It was sweet and awkward and perfect, fumbling and tender and full of love. Afterward they lay tangled together, skin to skin, breathing in sync. "I can't believe you're really mine," Thomas whispered against her hair. "I was always yours," Rose said. "From the moment you whispered that vow, I believed you, and I never looked back." They spent a week in Wallace settling James Fletcher's affairs, making arrangements for the property. Rose hired a local man to look after the place until they were ready to move back permanently. Then she and Thomas packed up their few belongings and rode north, back to Jack's ranch in Montana. But they did not stay long. Thomas had a restlessness in him, a need to see the world before settling down, and Rose felt it too. They worked the ranch through the fall, saving their money, making plans, and when winter came, they headed west. They spent 3 months in San Francisco, and Rose finally stood on that beach she had dreamed about, watching the Pacific roll in with Thomas's arms around her. They explored the city, marveled at the buildings and the crowds, ate food from countries they had never heard of. But eventually the call of the open spaces pulled them back east. They traveled through Oregon and Nevada, seeing the country, meeting people, collecting stories. Thomas worked odd jobs along the way, breaking horses, mending fences, whatever was needed. Rose helped too, proving herself as capable as any man. They were partners in every sense of the word, equal and complementary. Spring found them back at the Fletcher property. They spent the next year transforming it, building onto the house, clearing more land, bringing in cattle. It was hard work, exhausting and endless, but it was their work, their dream taking shape. And at night, no matter how tired they were, they would sit on the porch and talk about the future, about the family they wanted to raise, about growing old together in this place they were building. In the summer of 1880, Rose discovered she was pregnant. Thomas nearly fell off his horse when she told him, then whooped with joy and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing. They spent the next months preparing, Thomas building a cradle with his own hands, Rose sewing tiny clothes and blankets. Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1881. They named him James, after Rose's father, and Thomas cried when he held the baby for the first time, overcome with love and terror and responsibility all mixed together. Rose watched her husband cradle their child and felt her heart might burst with happiness. James was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Margaret, after Thomas's sister. And 2 years after that came another son, Samuel, who had his mother's dark hair and his father's quick smile. The house that had seemed so empty when Rose returned after her father's death was now full of noise and laughter and life. Thomas proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful, teaching the children to ride almost before they could walk. Rose watched him with their kids and marveled at the man he had become, so different from the haunted drifter who had saved her life that terrible morning in Wallace. They visited Jack Thornton every summer, bringing the children to stay at the ranch for a few weeks. Jack doted on them, teaching them all the things he had taught Thomas years before. He never married again after losing his wife, but he told Rose once that watching her and Thomas build their family had given him hope that good things were still possible in the world. Samuel Crane hanged in the spring of 1879, and Rose did not attend the execution. She had no desire to see him die, had no need for that particular closure. She had already moved on, had already built something better than revenge. Justice had been served, and that was enough. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. They expanded the ranch, took on a few hired hands as the work grew beyond what 2 people could manage. Rose kept the books, managed the household, raised the children. Thomas worked the land, bred horses, became known throughout the territory as a man of his word. Together they built a reputation for fairness and hard work, and their ranch prospered. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Rose back to San Francisco. They left the children with Jack and spent 2 weeks rediscovering the city and each other. They walked on the beach where they had stood all those years before, and Thomas renewed the vow he had made that night in Wallace, promising again to keep her safe and happy and free. "You've kept that promise every day," Rose told him, her head on his shoulder as they watched the sunset over the Pacific. "You saved my life, and then you gave me a reason to live it. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I thank God for it every single day." "I'm the lucky one," Thomas said. "You made me believe in second chances. You taught me that life is worth fighting for, worth staying for. Everything good in my life comes from you." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, and Rose thought about that terrified girl running through the streets of Wallace, about the cowboy who had appeared at exactly the right moment. So much had changed, so much had been built from the ashes of that terrible day. And all of it had been possible because she had believed Thomas when he whispered his vow, because she had chosen to trust him, to follow him into the unknown. She had never looked back, and she never would. By the time they returned to Idaho, Rose was pregnant again. Their fourth child, a daughter they named Sarah, was born in the spring of 1890. She was a surprise, coming nearly 6 years after Samuel, but she was welcomed with the same love and joy as all her siblings. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. James wanted to be a rancher like his father, could spend hours working with the horses and cattle. Margaret was quieter, bookish like her mother, dreaming of becoming a teacher. Samuel was the wild one, always climbing things, always getting into trouble, but with such charm that it was impossible to stay angry with him for long. And Sarah, the baby, was wise beyond her years, watching everything with solemn eyes and asking questions that made the adults pause and think. Thomas and Rose raised them with firm hands and loving hearts, teaching them to work hard, to treat people with respect, to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. They told the children the story of how they had met, about the terrible day that had brought them together, and about the justice that had followed. It was important, Rose felt, that the children understand that good could come from tragedy, that love could bloom even in the darkest soil. The children knew about their grandfather James, about the land he had died defending. They visited his grave every year on the anniversary of his death, placing flowers and telling him about their lives. Rose wanted them to remember him, to understand the legacy he had left them. As the years rolled by, Thomas and Rose watched their children grow into capable young adults. James took over more and more of the ranch work, eventually becoming his father's partner in all but name. Margaret went east to school, came back with a teaching certificate, and opened a schoolhouse in Wallace. Samuel joined the cavalry, much to his mother's worry, but served honorably and came home safe after his enlistment was up. Sarah married a young lawyer from Boise, had 3 children of her own. Through it all, Thomas and Rose remained the center around which the family orbited. Their love for each other never dimmed, never faded into comfortable indifference. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared struggles and triumphs, by the life they had built together from nothing. They grew old together on that ranch, their hair turning silver, their bodies marked by hard work and harder years. But they never stopped working, never stopped planning for the future. Thomas still rode out every morning to check the cattle, though he moved a bit slower now. Rose still managed the household, though she had help from daughters-in-law and grandchildren who came to visit. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. Children and grandchildren filled every room, spilled out into the yard. There was food and music and laughter, stories told and retold until everyone knew them by heart. That evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, Thomas and Rose sat on the porch where they had spent so many evenings over the years. The stars were brilliant overhead, the air sweet with the scent of sage and grass. 40 years, Rose said wonderingly. It seems impossible. It feels like just yesterday you pulled me into that alley. Best decision I ever made, Thomas said, taking her hand. His fingers were gnarled with arthritis now, the scars of his youth faded but never gone. I meant what I said that day, Rose. I meant every word. I know you did. And you kept every promise. You made me safe, you made me happy, you set me free, and then you gave me so much more than I ever dreamed of asking for. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night sky. After a while, Thomas spoke again, his voice soft with memory. Do you remember that night before we confronted Crane? When I told you I loved you for the first time? Of course I remember. I remember everything about those days. They're burned into my memory. I was so scared. Not of Crane, not of dying, but of losing you before I had a chance to really have you. I had spent so much of my life running, never staying, never letting myself care about anything. And then you came along and changed everything. He turned to look at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Thank you, Rose. Thank you for believing in me, for taking a chance on a broken-down cowboy with nothing to offer but promises. You were never broken, Rose said firmly. You were hurt, yes, but not broken. And you offered me everything that mattered. Love, loyalty, partnership, a future. That's more than most people ever get. Thomas leaned over and kissed her, gentle and sweet, a kiss 40 years in the making and yet still fresh as the first one. I love you, Rose Quinn. I will love you until the day I die and beyond. I love you too, Thomas Quinn, forever and always. They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something beautiful from the ruins. The ranch stretched out around them, land that had been bought with blood and defended with courage, now thriving with life and love. Their children and grandchildren slept in the house behind them, the next generation already starting to take up the work of building their own futures. And as the night deepened, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, Rose rested her head on Thomas's shoulder and thought about vows and promises, about belief and faith. She thought about the cowboy who had whispered his promise in the dark, who had given her a reason to keep living when everything seemed lost. She thought about how she had believed him, how she had chosen to trust, how she had never looked back. It had been the best decision of her life. And as she drifted toward sleep, held safe in the arms of the man who had loved her through everything, Rose Fletcher Quinn knew with absolute certainty that she would make the same choice again, 1,000 times over, without hesitation or regret. This was what love looked like. This was what promises kept could build. This was a life well lived, together, and it was more than enough.